I remember the exact moment I decided to build that basement. It was June 2019, and I was sitting in my living room in Joplin, Missouri, watching the news coverage of another town torn apart by a tornado. The reporter stood in front of what used to be someone's home, now just a concrete slab with scattered debris. A teddy bear hung from a tree branch 50 feet in the air. That image burned itself into my mind. I was 68 years old, retired from 30 years as a civil engineer, and I knew exactly what kind of forces could do that to a neighborhood. I knew what wind speeds of 200 miles per hour could do to human flesh and bone. And I knew that most people had no idea how fragile their sense of safety really was. So I started building. Not just any basement, but a reinforced concrete bunker that could withstand an EF5 tornado. I poured 8-inch thick walls with rebar every 6 inches. I installed a steel door with multiple locking points. I added ventilation systems, emergency lighting, water storage, medical supplies, non-perishable food, battery-powered radios, and even a small generator. I spent 6 months and nearly $40,000 of my retirement savings on that project. Every weekend I was down there, checking seals, testing systems, rotating supplies. It became my routine, my discipline, my peace of mind. My neighbors thought I was insane. Derek Patterson lived 3 houses down, a 42-year-old insurance salesman with a perfect lawn and a louder than necessary laugh. He was the kind of man who measured his worth by how much everyone liked him at neighborhood barbecues. His wife, Jennifer, taught 3rd grade and always smiled too much, like she was afraid of what her face might reveal if she stopped. They had 2 kids, Emma and Tyler, 8 and 6 years old, who rode their bikes up and down our quiet street every evening. It was at Derek's 4th of July barbecue in 2021 when the mockery really started. I'd brought potato salad, stood by the grill with a beer I wasn't drinking, and listened to Derek hold court about his latest sales numbers. Then someone, I think it was Bill Kowalski from across the street, mentioned my basement project. "Steve's got himself a doomsday bunker now," Bill said, grinning. "Spent a fortune on it." Derek's eyes lit up with that particular gleam people get when they've found an easy target. "Oh man, Steve, I've been meaning to ask you about that. What exactly are you preparing for? Nuclear war? Zombie apocalypse?" He laughed, and others joined in. I felt the heat rise in my chest, but I kept my voice steady. "Tornadoes mostly. We're in Tornado Alley. It's just common sense." "Common sense?" Derek shook his head, still grinning. "Steve, we've got sirens. We've got weather alerts on our phones, we've got basements. You act like we're all gonna die tomorrow." "The sirens can fail," I said quietly. "Technology fails, infrastructure fails. When it does, you need backup." Jennifer touched Derek's arm, sensing the tension, but he was on a roll now. "You watch too many disaster movies, man. This is Missouri, not some war zone. We're fine. You gotta learn to relax a little. Enjoy life instead of hiding in your creepy basement all the time." Creepy. That word stuck with me. Not practical, not prepared. Creepy. I left the barbecue early, drove home, went down to my basement and sat on the bench I'd built along the wall. The concrete was cool against my back. The air smelled faintly of earth and concrete dust. I ran my hand along the wall, feeling the solid reality of it. This wasn't creepy. This was survival. This was responsibility. But I was alone in understanding that, and the loneliness settled into my bones like winter cold. Over the next 2 years, the jokes continued. When I'd test my generator on Saturday mornings, Derek would shout across his yard, "Preparing for the apocalypse again, Steve?" When I carried supplies down to the basement, visible through my open garage, kids on bikes would slow down and whisper to each other. I became the neighborhood eccentric, the old man who couldn't let go of his paranoia. People were polite to my face, but I heard the laughter after I walked away. I felt it in the way conversations would pause when I approached, then resume with forced casualness. I didn't care. Or I told myself I didn't care. But the truth is, it wore on me. I started going out less, spending more time in my workshop, more time checking and rechecking my preparations. My wife had passed away 4 years earlier, and without her, the house felt too big, too empty. The basement became my refuge, the one place where everything made sense, where every item had a purpose, where I was in control. Now, if you've lived through a real tornado, You know there's a feeling in the air before it hits. The atmosphere changes. The pressure drops. Birds go silent. The sky takes on this sickly green color, like the world is holding its breath. But if you haven't experienced it, you don't recognize the signs. You don't understand that nature is screaming a warning that your technology might miss. May 17, 2024 started as an unremarkable Friday. Temperature in the mid-70s, partly cloudy, a slight breeze. I'd spent the morning working in my garden, pulling weeds, checking the tomato plants I'd started in April. Around noon, I noticed the clouds building to the southwest, dark and heavy, moving faster than they should. The air felt thick, humid, charged with something I couldn't name but recognized in my gut. I went inside, turned on the weather radio, severe thunderstorm watch for our county and 3 others, possible tornado development. I checked my phone, the weather app showing the same information. Nothing immediate, nothing critical, but that feeling in my chest wouldn't go away. That tightness that came from 30 years of reading structural stress reports, of understanding how systems fail, of knowing that possible can become certain in seconds. I went down to the basement, checked the supplies, tested the lights, made sure the radio was working. Everything was ready. It always was. I came back upstairs, made myself a sandwich I didn't eat, and watched the sky darken through my kitchen window. By 3 o'clock, the clouds were black, roiling, moving in ways that made my engineer's brain scream warnings. I could see rotation in the cloud base, a lowering that meant something was organizing up there, something powerful and hungry. I stepped outside, felt the wind shift, felt the temperature drop 10 degrees in as many seconds. The air smelled like ozone and wet earth. Derek was in his driveway, washing his car, completely oblivious. His kids were playing basketball in the driveway. Jennifer was visible through their front window, probably making dinner. Normal life continuing as if the sky wasn't preparing to tear the world apart. I walked over. "Derek, you should get your family inside. That storm's looking bad." He glanced up at the sky, shrugged. "It's just clouds, Steve. Weather app says thunderstorms, nothing major." "The clouds are rotating. See that?" I pointed to the southwestern sky. "That's not normal storm movement." He squinted, then laughed. "Man, you see danger everywhere, don't you? It's just weather. We'll be fine." He went back to soaping his car, dismissing me without another word. I stood there for a moment, feeling the wind pick up, feeling that pressure in my ears that meant something was very wrong. Then I went back to my house, back down to my basement, and waited. The sirens should have gone off at 3:47 p.m. I know because I was watching the clock, listening to the weather radio, hearing the meteorologist's voice grow more urgent as he tracked the supercell moving directly toward our area. "Tornado warning for Jasper County," he said. "Take shelter immediately. This is a particularly dangerous situation." But the sirens stayed silent. Later, we'd learned that a software glitch in the county's emergency alert system had prevented the activation signal from reaching the sirens. A cascading failure, starting with a server update that morning, propagating through backup systems that should have caught it but didn't. Technology failing exactly when it was needed most, exactly as I'd always known it could. At 3:52 p.m., the sky turned that green I'd seen before, that color that means the atmosphere is doing something unnatural, something violent. The wind stopped completely. Total silence, like the world had died. Then I heard it. That sound people always describe, but you can't really understand until you've experienced it. A freight train, they say, but it's more than that. It's a roar that vibrates in your chest, that shakes your teeth, that sounds like the earth itself is being torn open. I was already in the basement, door sealed, when I heard the screaming outside. The screaming cut through even the thick concrete walls. High-pitched, desperate, the sound of people who had just realized that everything they believed about their safety was a lie. I heard pounding on my front door, fists hammering against wood with the force of pure terror. Then voices, multiple voices, shouting my name. "Steve! Steve, please open the door!" That was Derek's voice, stripped of all its casual confidence, raw with fear. "Steve, the kids, please!" Jennifer, screaming for her children's lives. I ran up the basement stairs, my 68-year-old knees protesting but adrenaline overriding the pain. Through the window beside my front door, I could see them, A cluster of people on my porch, their faces white with terror, hair whipping in wind that had gone from 0 to 60 miles per hour in seconds. Derek, Jennifer, their 2 kids, Bill Kowalski and his teenage daughter Sarah, Margaret Chen from next door, 73 years old, and clutching her cat carrier. 2 other neighbors I recognized but whose names I couldn't recall in the chaos. A young couple who'd moved in last month. Behind them, the sky was a wall of black and green, rotating, descending. I could see debris already airborne, tree branches, roof shingles, someone's patio furniture tumbling through the air like toys. The roar was getting louder, closer, a sound that made your instincts scream to hide, to burrow into the earth, to make yourself small and prey. I threw open the door. "Basement now, move!" They didn't need to be told twice. They flooded into my house, a stampede of terror, pushing past me toward the open basement door. Derek was carrying Tyler. Jennifer had Emma by the hand, both kids crying, their faces buried against their parents. Margaret was moving too slowly, her old legs unable to keep pace, and I grabbed her arm, half carrying her toward the stairs. "Down! Everyone down!" I shouted over the roar that was now shaking the walls of my house. Pictures fell from the walls. The windows rattled in their frames. The lights flickered. Bill was the last one in, and as I pulled him through the doorway, I saw it. The tornado, maybe half a mile away, a massive wedge of churning darkness, wider than it was tall, devouring everything in its path. I watched a tree, a massive oak that had stood in the Hendersons' yard for probably 100 years, simply vanish into that darkness, ripped from the earth like a weed. I slammed the door shut, threw the deadbolt and ran for the basement stairs. The last person was just reaching the bottom when the world above us exploded. The sound was beyond description. Imagine standing inside a jet engine while someone fires artillery shells at you, while 1,000 windows shatter simultaneously. The house above us was being torn apart, and we could hear every second of it. The roar, the crashing, the screaming of metal and wood being twisted beyond their structural limits. The basement door at the top of the stairs was shaking, the frame groaning, and I could see daylight appearing around the edges as the house above it was lifted and torn away. "Get against the wall, cover your heads," I shouted, but I don't know if anyone heard me over the noise. We huddled against the reinforced concrete wall, 9 people pressed together in the space I'd built for exactly this moment. Derek had his body over both his kids, Jennifer wrapped around them all. Bill was shielding Sarah with his bulk. Margaret was between me and the young couple, all of us crouched low, hands over our heads, feeling the building shake like we were in an earthquake. Something massive hit the house above us. The entire structure shuddered, and dust rained down from the ceiling. The lights went out, plunging us into darkness for a heartbeat before my emergency lighting kicked in, bathing everything in a dim red glow. Emma was screaming, a high-pitched wail of pure terror. Tyler was silent, his eyes wide and blank with shock. Jennifer was praying, a rapid whisper of, "Please God, please God, please God," that became a rhythm under the chaos. The tornado was directly overhead now. The pressure change made my ears pop painfully. I could feel it in my chest, in my lungs, like the air was being sucked out of the room. The basement door at the top of the stairs exploded inward, ripped off its hinges, and suddenly we could see up into what used to be my house. There was no roof, no walls, just open sky, that terrible green-black sky, and debris flying past at speeds that would kill you instantly if it hit you. A 2x4 flew past the opening, moving so fast it was just a blur. Someone's car tumbled through the air above us, spinning like a toy. Derek looked up at that opening, at the annihilation happening 20 feet above our heads, and I saw something break in his face. The realization of how close they'd come to being up there, exposed, unprotected. How close his children had come to being torn apart by wind and debris. He looked at me, and in the red emergency lighting I saw tears streaming down his face. "I'm sorry," he mouthed, but I couldn't hear him over the roar. "I'm so sorry." I nodded, put my hand on his shoulder. There would be time for words later. Right now, we just had to survive. The tornado stayed over us for what felt like hours, but was probably less than 2 minutes. 2 minutes of the world ending, of everything above ground being erased, of 9 people pressed against concrete and steel, breathing dust and fear, listening to their entire lives being destroyed. Then, gradually, the roar began to fade. The wind decreased, the pressure equalized, the debris stopped flying past the opening above us. And then silence. Complete, absolute silence, more terrifying in its way than the roar had been. We stayed huddled against the wall for another full minute, nobody moving, nobody speaking, just breathing and trying to process that we were still alive. Emma's crying had stopped. She was just staring at nothing, in shock. Tyler was trembling violently, his whole body shaking. Margaret was clutching her cat carrier so hard her knuckles were white, and I could hear her cat yowling inside, terrified, but alive. "Is it over?" Jennifer whispered, her voice hoarse. "Is it really over?" I stood slowly, my joints protesting, and looked up at the opening where my basement door used to be. Blue sky was visible now, patches of it between lingering dark clouds. The green color was gone. The rotation was gone. I could hear rain starting to fall, a gentle pattering that seemed obscene after the violence we'd just experienced. "It's over," I said. "Stay here for a few more minutes. Make sure there's no second cell coming." I climbed the basement stairs carefully, testing each step, making sure the structure was stable. When I reached the top and looked out at what used to be my neighborhood, my breath caught in my throat. It was gone. All of it. My house was reduced to the basement, and a few wall studs still standing, everything else stripped away. Derek's house 3 doors down was completely gone, just a concrete foundation with a bathtub sitting in the middle of it, the only thing heavy enough to stay put. Bill's house was a pile of rubble. Margaret's house had been pushed off its foundation and was sitting in the middle of the street, collapsed in on itself. Every tree was either gone or stripped bare, just broken trunks pointing at the sky like accusing fingers. The young couple's house, the one they'd just bought, was simply absent. Not destroyed, not collapsed, just gone, as if it had never existed. I could see their foundation from where I stood, empty concrete with pipes sticking up, and scattered around it in a debris field that stretched for hundreds of yards were the pieces of their life. A couch cushion in a tree, a refrigerator upside down in what used to be someone's yard. Photographs, thousands of them, scattered like confetti, images of strangers' lives mixed with the mud and destruction. And in the distance, maybe a quarter-mile away, I could see the tornado still on the ground, moving northeast, still destroying, still killing, an unstoppable force of nature that cared nothing for human plans or human lives. I heard footsteps behind me. Derek had come up the stairs, was standing beside me, looking at the devastation. His face was gray, his eyes moving from one destroyed home to another, processing the fact that if he'd stayed in his house, if he'd kept washing his car, if he'd dismissed my warning just a little bit longer, he and his entire family would be dead. "My house," he said, his voice flat, emotionless. "It's gone." "Yes," I said. "We would have been in there. We would have been..." He couldn't finish the sentence. He turned to me, and I saw something in his eyes I'd never seen before. Not gratitude, not yet. Something deeper. Recognition. The understanding that everything he'd believed about the world, about safety, about preparedness being paranoia, had been wrong. Catastrophically, fatally wrong. "You tried to warn me," he said. "You tried to tell me, and I laughed at you. I called you creepy. I made jokes about your basement." His voice was shaking now. "My kids, Steve. My kids would be dead if you hadn't... But they're not," I said firmly. "They're alive. Everyone down there is alive. That's what matters now." Jennifer came up next, then the others, one by one, emerging from the basement into a world that no longer existed. I watched their faces as they processed the destruction, saw their homes gone, their possessions scattered across the landscape, their entire sense of security shattered. Sarah was crying silently, tears streaming down her face as she stared at where her house used to be. Margaret was just shaking her head over and over, her lips moving in what might have been prayer or might have been shock. The young couple, whose names I finally remembered were Jason and Amanda, stood holding each other, looking at the empty foundation where their first home had been. They'd been married 6 months, they'd just finished unpacking, and now it was all gone, erased in 2 minutes of wind and fury. "What do we do now?" Bill asked, his voice rough. "Where do we even start?" I looked around at the 9 people standing in the ruins of our neighborhood, all of them looking at me, waiting for an answer. And I realized that something had shifted. I wasn't the crazy old man anymore. I wasn't the paranoid eccentric with the creepy basement. I was the person who had saved their lives, and now they were looking to me to tell them how to survive what came next. "First, we check for injuries," I said, falling back on the emergency training I'd done years ago. "Then we check for gas leaks, downed power lines, anything immediately dangerous. Then we start looking for other survivors. There are probably people trapped in basements, people hurt, people who need help." "The sirens never went off," Jennifer said suddenly, her voice sharp with anger. "Why didn't the sirens go off? We had no warning, nothing." "Technology failed," I said quietly. "It does that. That's why you need backup plans. That's why you need to pay attention to the signs nature gives you, not just the alerts on your phone." Derek flinched at that, hearing the echo of every conversation we'd had, every warning he'd dismissed. But I wasn't trying to make him feel worse. I was trying to make sure he understood, that they all understood, so this would never happen again. We spent the next hour searching the immediate area. We found the Hendersons in their basement, shaken but alive. We found old Mr. Patterson, no relation to Derek, trapped under debris in what used to be his garage. It took all of us to lift the beam off him, and when we did, we saw his leg was broken, bone visible through torn skin. We made a splint from broken boards and torn cloth, and Bill, who'd been a medic in the army 20 years ago, did what he could to stabilize him. We found 3 people dead. A woman I didn't know, probably from the next street over, impaled by a fence post. A man crushed under his collapsed garage. And a child, maybe 4 years old, lying in a field 100 yards from where any houses had stood, looking almost peaceful except for the unnatural angle of his neck. Jennifer found him, and the sound she made, a wail of grief for a child she didn't even know, was almost worse than the tornado itself. By the time emergency services arrived, 2 hours after the tornado had passed, we'd organized the survivors into groups. The injured in one area, the walking wounded in another, those in shock being comforted by those who were holding it together. We'd marked the locations of the dead with torn cloth tied to debris, so the first responders would know where to look. The EMTs and firefighters came through like an army, efficient and professional, triaging the injured, setting up a temporary shelter, bringing water and blankets and medical supplies. A Red Cross truck arrived, then another, then news crews, their cameras capturing the devastation, the survivors, the scope of the disaster. A reporter approached me, a young woman with perfect hair and a microphone, asking how we'd survived. I told her about the basement, about the 9 people who'd taken shelter there. She asked if I'd known the tornado was coming. "I knew something was coming," I said. "I've known for years that something was coming. That's why I prepared." "But the sirens didn't go off," she said. "How did you know to take shelter?" "I watched the sky," I said simply. I paid attention to what nature was telling me, not just what technology was telling me. And when I saw the signs, I acted. She asked a few more questions, but I was done talking. I walked away, back to the group of survivors, back to the people who'd mocked my basement and now owed their lives to it. Derek found me as the sun was setting, painting the devastated landscape in shades of orange and red that were almost beautiful, if you could forget what had happened. His kids were with the Red Cross volunteers, being given food and warm clothes. Jennifer was having her cuts treated by an EMT. He looked exhausted, hollowed out. A man who'd seen his entire worldview collapse in the span of 2 minutes. "I need to say something," he started, but I held up my hand. "You don't owe me anything, Derek." "Yes, I do," he said firmly. "I owe you my life, my kids' lives, Jennifer's life, and I owe you an apology. I was wrong about you. I was wrong about everything. You weren't paranoid. You weren't crazy. You were right, and I was too arrogant to see it." I looked at him, at this man who'd spent 2 years mocking me, and I didn't feel vindicated. I didn't feel satisfied. I just felt tired and sad and grateful that his kids were alive. "You weren't wrong to want to enjoy your life," I said. "You weren't wrong to want to feel safe. You were just wrong to think that safety comes without preparation. The world is dangerous, Derek. It always has been. Tornadoes, earthquakes, floods, fires, pandemics, infrastructure failures, any number of things can destroy everything you have in minutes. That's not paranoia. That's just reality. And the only rational response to that reality is to prepare for it. I get that now, he said. I really do. And I want to learn. I want to know how to do what you did. How to build something that can protect my family when everything else fails. Over the next few weeks, as the community began the long process of rebuilding, something remarkable happened. My basement, the one that had been mocked and ridiculed, became the center of the neighborhood's recovery. We held meetings there, planning reconstruction, organizing supply distribution, coordinating with FEMA and insurance companies. It became a symbol, not of paranoia, but of resilience, of the wisdom of preparation, of the importance of taking responsibility for your own survival. Derek and Bill and Jason and several other neighbors approached me about building a community storm shelter, something bigger than my basement, something that could protect the entire neighborhood when the next tornado came, because we all understood now that there would be a next time. This was Tornado Alley. This was the reality we lived in, and pretending otherwise, relying on sirens that could fail and warnings that might not come, was a luxury we could no longer afford. I helped them design it. A reinforced concrete structure partially underground, with capacity for 50 people, stocked with emergency supplies, with multiple redundant communication systems, with everything we'd need to survive not just a tornado, but any disaster that might come. The whole neighborhood contributed money and labor, working together in a way we never had before the tornado. It took 6 months to build, and when it was finished, we had a dedication ceremony. The mayor came, gave a speech about community resilience. The local news covered it, but the moment that mattered most to me was when Derek stood up in front of everyone and told the story of the tornado, of how he'd mocked my basement, of how that basement had saved his family's life. Steve tried to warn us, he said, his voice carrying across the crowd. He tried to tell us that we needed to prepare, that we couldn't just rely on technology and luck, and we laughed at him. We called him paranoid. We called his basement creepy. And when the tornado came, when the sirens failed, when everything we thought would protect us didn't work, Steve's creepy basement was the only thing standing between us and death. He looked at me, standing at the back of the crowd, and his eyes were wet. I will never forget that. I will never forget that my children are alive because one man had the wisdom and the courage to prepare for the worst, even when everyone around him thought he was crazy. Thank you, Steve. Thank you for saving our lives. And thank you for teaching us that preparation isn't paranoia. It's love, it's responsibility. It's the most rational thing you can do in an irrational world. The crowd applauded, and people came up to shake my hand, to thank me, to tell me their own stories of the tornado and the aftermath. But the moment that meant the most was when Emma and Tyler, Derek's kids, came up and hugged me, their small arms wrapping around my waist, their faces pressed against my chest. "Thank you for saving us, Mr. Steve," Emma whispered. "Daddy says you're a hero." I'm not a hero. Heroes do extraordinary things. I just did what was rational, what was responsible, what any person should do when they understand the reality of the world we live in. But if my preparation, my creepy basement, my refusal to ignore the dangers around us, if that saved even one life, then every dollar I spent, every hour I worked, every joke I endured was worth it. The world is dangerous, disasters happen, technology fails, infrastructure fails. The only thing you can truly rely on is your own preparation, your own wisdom, your own willingness to face reality, instead of hiding from it. That's not paranoia. That's not obsession. That's survival. That's love. That's the responsibility we owe to ourselves and to the people we care about. And now when I look at that community storm shelter, when I see families practicing their tornado drills, when I hear parents teaching their children to watch the sky and recognize the signs of danger, I know that something good came from that terrible day. 9 people lived because I prepared, and now an entire community is preparing, learning, taking responsibility for their own survival. That's the legacy I want to leave. Not fear, not paranoia, but wisdom. The understanding that we live in a world where disasters happen, and the only rational response is to prepare for them, to build strong foundations, to stock emergency supplies, to pay attention to the warnings nature gives us, to never assume that technology will save us, that someone else will protect us, that we can afford to be complacent. Because when the sirens fail, when the warnings don't come, when the tornado is bearing down on you, and you have seconds to make a choice, the only thing that will save you is the preparation you did before that moment arrived. The basement you built, the supplies you stocked, the wisdom you cultivated, the responsibility you took for your own survival. They called my basement creepy. They called me paranoid. They laughed at my preparations and mocked my concerns. But when the tornado came, when everything they believed about their safety was proven wrong, that creepy basement was the only thing standing between them and annihilation. I don't need their apologies. I don't need their gratitude. I just need them to understand, to learn, to prepare, because the next disaster is coming. It always is, and the only question is whether we'll be ready for it.